Welcome to our fourth annual Light Reading SCTE Breakfast Roundtable here at Cable Tech Expo. We intend to bring you many more over the next few years, so we'd like to think that we're establishing a bit of a tradition here. My name is Alan Bresnick. I'm the Cable Video Practice Leader for Light Reading, and I'm also a contributing analyst on the heavy reading side of the house. I focus on the cable, video, and broadband technology markets. In this morning's session, we will look at cable's continuing progress in the Wi-Fi market, discuss ways for cable operators to optimize and monetize their wireless networks, and explore how they can overcome the major challenges that still lie ahead for them. We'll also take questions from the audience. I think we have one mic up here that you can come up and stand, or if you want, you can really shout it out, and we'll repeat it up here. So we'll get to them when we get into the roundtable part of the discussion. Okay, so before we get to the program, let me quickly explain who we are, just in case you don't know. Light Reading is the market-leading online community for the global communication sector. Heavy Reading is Light Reading's market research arm. We stage a number of specialized events like this throughout the world each year, including several just on cable-related topics. In fact, our next one is a full-day conference in New York on December 1st on cable business services that we hope you can all join us for. Okay, that's enough about us. Now let's move the spotlight onto our four sponsors who have made this program possible. Do it in alphabetical order. Our four sponsors today are Alcatel-Lucent, Amdocs, NetScout, and Viavi. So thank you all for supporting this program today. Okay, let me introduce our six speakers. We're really glad to have them here. They represent all different aspects of the industry, as well as have all different perspectives on the Wi-Fi market. Okay, so in no particular order, since they're not lined up the way I have them, but first we're going to hear from Robert Sabone. Rob is Vice President of Broadband Services, Wireless Residential Services for Time Warner Cable. Next we have Steve Harris near the end there. Steve is Senior Director of Advanced Technologies for SCTE. We failed to promote him in the brochures that went out, but he is Senior Director, so sorry about the title there, Steve. Then there's Scott Pettygrove. Scott is Director of Wi-Fi Products for Viavi. Our fourth speaker will be Jeffrey Valley, right here to my left. He's our one speaker returning from last year. Jeff is Senior Director of Consulting Engineering for Alcatel-Lucent. Is consulting IP engineering?
Yeah, IP engineer, IP
right.
consulting engineering.
Sorry, dropped the IP there.
Yeah, that's
okay.
right.
Fifth, we have Ann Hatchell. Ann is Head of Network Marketing for Amdocs. She's right in the middle. And we also have Jeff Templeton. Jeff is Sales Engineering Director for NetScout. And since we have two Jeffs on the panel, Jeff Templeton has graciously agreed to be JT, and Jeffrey Valley will be Jeff. So no confusion among the Jeffs here. Okay, so I'm going to quickly run through a few slides just to set the context for the discussion that we're going to have, because I mostly want to focus on the roundtable discussion. After I'm finished with my intro slides, I'm going to ask each of our speakers just to spend 1 or 2 minutes making a couple of main points about the Wi-Fi market or about cable's role in it, and then we'll get into our roundtable questions, and we'll also take questions from the audience. Okay, so let's look at some of the market drivers that are pushing cable operators to plunge forward in the Wi-Fi market. As you can see, we list about 10 here, courtesy of one of our Cable Insider reports that one of our contributing analysts, Craig Letty, prepared for us. And even though it's a year or two old, it's still quite relevant. So I won't run through all these drivers here. You can take them in at your leisure. But a couple of things I wanted to highlight are things like DOCSIS 3.0 and now DOCSIS 3.1 coming with higher wireline broadband speeds that has a great influence on the wireless broadband speeds. And so those two standards for HFC cable are playing a big role in what's happening with Wi-Fi, increasing Wi-Fi speeds, increasing consumers' expectations of Wi-Fi speeds. So I'll let you go through all these at your leisure. Let's see if there's any other one I wanted to point out. Things like connected devices, the explosion in connected devices. There's now 4 or 5 connected devices in the average American home. It's supposed to go up to about 7, I think, by the end of the decade, according to various surveys. So that's increasing the need for and the pressure for more advanced Wi-Fi, and things like TV everywhere. People wanting to get their video programming wherever they are is increasing the need and the pressure for more advanced wireless service, for more higher capacity, greater bandwidth Wi-Fi. Okay, so next slide here is my latest update on where the major U.S. MSOs stand in terms of Wi-Fi activity. We know pretty much all the major MSOs in the U.S., as well as in Canada and in Europe, are now aggressively rolling out Wi-Fi service. Even such former laggards as Charter and Cox here in the U.S. have enthusiastically joined the parade. In fact, after flirting with WiMAX, 3G, and even 4G mobile technology rollouts previously, cable operators are clearly turning to Wi-Fi in a huge way, which was not foreseen even just a few years ago. In just the past year, for example, Comcast has passed the 11 million mark for access points for hotspots around the country. Cablevision has passed the 1 million mark, and even Time Warner Cable has recently passed the 100,000 mark. So Rob Sabrone is going to talk to us a little bit about what Time Warner's planning to do with their 100,000 Wi-Fi hotspots. Okay. Plus, cable operators have struck Wi-Fi roaming agreements to extend their reach and are developing a national roaming network with cable labs. Thanks to such moves, there are now over 400,000 Wi-Fi hotspots around the country that are linked up that way, so that subscribers can roam from one network to another network. Even more impressively, cable operators are striking international roaming agreements, such as the big one that was struck about a year ago between Comcast and Liberty Global that covers millions of hotspots on both sides of the Atlantic. Okay, so now let's focus on some of the supporting technologies for cable's embrace of Wi-Fi. Once again, this chart comes out of one of our insider reports about Wi-Fi that Craig did. Here again, there are about 10 different supporting technologies on this slide, which are too many to go through right now. And actually, we're going to cover a bunch of them during the roundtable discussion. So once again, take a look at these slides at your leisure. We'll have them available if anybody wants them afterwards, and we can send them to you. Here's a slide that I borrowed from Cable Labs about just pointing out one of the supporting technologies, which is Passpoint, which is a key one, especially for operators like Time Warner. It provides a lot of things that allow for carrier-grade Wi-Fi and automatic roaming, seamless roaming, automatic handoffs, and device authentication. We'll get into more of that during the panel discussion. One other slide from Cable Labs talking about what the cable industry is trying to do to improve the quality of Wi-Fi, which is going to be a large part of our discussion today. Because to monetize Wi-Fi, it has to be optimized, and right now, in most cases, cable Wi-Fi is not quite ready for prime time in terms of being able to charge for it and make some money off it, but it's a lot closer than it was just a year ago when we had this conference in Denver. So we'll talk about that in our discussion. Finally, almost finally, I have our latest projections on where Wi-Fi is going in the U.S. It's sort of an ambitious projection about where things are going to stand 2 years from now. But we know that so far, there are, as we did on the chart earlier, that there are over 12 million hotspots in the U.S. right now, both indoor and outdoor, probably heading towards at least 13 to 14 million by the end of the year. And then we're expecting a big explosion again over the next 2 years as a lot of cable operators follow the example of Comcast and Cablevision and start installing dual SSID hotspots, community hotspots, in all of their broadband homes. We'll see whether that prediction comes true or not. Okay, my last slide, talking about what we're going to be talking about, the key optimizations and monetization challenges that cable operators face. Once again, I won't go through all of these here because we're going to get into discussion about them, but you can see there's a long list, and I could have made this a lot longer. Lots of things that cable operators have to figure out. Fortunately, they have a lot of partners up here who are willing to help them figure that out, and they're all going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. So I really want to get to what everybody has to say, so I'm going to finish off my comments here, and we're going to turn to the panel and give them each a couple minutes to make a couple main points. So I think we'll start with our cable operator first. So Rob, tell us about your perspective and Time Warner's perspective.
So you hit on most of my big data points.
Okay.
We're the second largest MSO, as I think everybody knows, at least for now. We announced earlier this year that we've got over 100,000 hotspots deployed. Those are all primarily in public areas, so we're not doing home hotspot at this point. So those would be outdoor hotspots, hotspots in SMBs, and then venue-related hotspots. So I manage that business. I also manage the home networking business, as well as the acronym alphabet soup of MVNO activities that we've had over the past few years that Alan mentioned as well. In terms of monetization, I think we do believe we are monetizing the network today. We see a tremendous benefit from retention in terms of our broadband or HSD customers and being able to keep them longer. Many of the customers that are using the Wi-Fi network are not only broadband customers, but they're double or triple play customers. So to the extent we can keep one of those customers longer, as opposed to going out and acquiring a new customer, there's a huge financial benefit to us. And that's our primary strategy right now. So.
How have you been able to measure that properly?
We measure that on an ongoing basis, and we look at it quarterly. We look at the cohorts of broadband users that are using Wi-Fi versus the ones that are not, and we try and isolate based on demographics and income levels and where people live to try and remove any other noise in that, and we see a pretty good disparity there. So,
Any great numbers you can share with us?
no,
I didn't think so.
just that we're seeing.
But I figured I'd ask. Okay. Let's turn to, thanks very much. Let's turn to Steve Harris from SCTE. Steve?
Good morning, everyone. So we all can attest to the growth of Wi-Fi. Every cable operator will share with you how Wi-Fi is growing and how you're able to use it for mainly video right now. Video consumption is increasing, whether it's YouTube video or an application video. So that's huge. And like Rob said and Alan said, the carrier grade story is very, very important. It's a story that keeps growing year after year. It's very important for us to get our networks at a carrier grade level. And what that means is, if you take the home network, for example, I should be able to stream 4 HDIP video at one time over my access point. Is that possible today? Or do I have 90% coverage at my location? And maybe that's through MoCA over Wi-Fi or also using Wi-Fi extenders in the home. And leveraging new technologies like 802.11ac and even 802.11ac second wave. Most of our networks today are best effort, and it's going to be some time before we bring our carrier grade access points and hotspots up above the best effort ones that exist today. The other story that's very important to us, and we'll get into a little bit later, is the LTE unlicensed. It's something that's very important to cable operators. We have a very valuable spectrum that we're utilizing with all our hotspots, a huge investment in those hotspots, and even investment in the home. And we want to make sure that LTE unlicensed plays fairly with us. Alan also mentioned PassPoint, another huge technology that's leveraged the cable industry to roam between access points like we would roam between cell towers. It's a huge technology. It needs to be implemented in all our hotspots, and that's ongoing. And better analytics, so we can really understand the quality of experience for the customer and ongoing improvements and optimization to make sure that we have the best quality experience. And lastly, just the newer technologies that are coming. We always talk about how many devices are in the home. I know my home, my daughter's 11 years old. She has like 5 devices to connect to the internet, streaming YouTube and video content constantly. Well, my daughter is one person that's a representative of all the kids that are connected. And if you think about how the kids are connecting, how adults are connecting, it's very easy for a home to have a dozen devices, and as that's going to continue to grow with the Internet of Things. So those are some of my main points.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So what are those 5 devices? Can you name?
Well, she has an iPad, she has a connected smart television, we have a smart Blu-ray DVD player, and a gaming console. So this is just to name a few.
Wow. So how many think she'll have by the time she's 18 and goes off to college?
I mean, with the Internet of Things and machine to machine, Could be a couple dozen, right?
The question is how much money Steve will have left over to send us to buys all the connected devices.
And how much room will we have in the car to bring that all, plug them all to the
Well,
university?
we'll have a connected car, hopefully.
It's true. Okay. Now, just go in alphabetical order with our sponsors. So let's go to Jeffrey Valley from Alcatel-Lucent.
Yeah, sure. Again, I'm Jeff Valley with Alcatel-Lucent. I'm in our IP business unit, so we're the folks that make all the router switches, in this case, Wi-Fi gateways. So within ALU, we're focused on really the infrastructure segment of this market. Interestingly enough, we don't make wireless access points, so we're not really in the 802 Wi-Fi business. But what that means is we spend a lot of time focusing on how to make the network carrier grade, right? How do we build architectures that are redundant and have redundancy built into them so that you're not suffering some sort of transient failure because you have a device that's not working correctly. And then from a gateway perspective, we work to centralize a lot of things that otherwise would be distributed, and I don't mean centralize necessarily in one location, but not leave it up to the access point to handle things like IP address management and subscriber management. So from a gateway perspective, we'll enable a couple interesting things. A couple of recent things that we're proud of is the ability to do IPv6 only APs. So you know, if you take a look at some of the things that Aaron has announced recently around IPv4 availability, well, there isn't much. So you know, you go out and deploy millions and millions of access points, and you get into a problem with now you're deploying, you know, you're utilizing a lot of IP4 addresses just for your internal infrastructure. So supporting things like v6 GRE, for example, from every access point means you can have dual stack devices, whether those are laptops or cell phones or tablets or whatever the case happens to be, but none of the infrastructure to support it requires an IPv4 address at all. Dual stack on the node and then some sort of network address translation at a gateway where those IPv4 addresses can be overloaded until you don't need them anymore, until you can do something like NAT64 or the majority of your content is deployed over IPv6. So that's kind of a cool thing. The other thing that is that you know this industry can probably address a little bit more aggressively, and this is not everybody across the board, but it's the idea of what we call application assurance. Some people call it deep packet inspection, but the real question is, what do you do with traffic once you get it onto your network? So being able to offer you know, a consistent user experience around things like parental controls or URL whitelisting or URL blacklisting, especially when a subscriber moves from their home network to a coffee shop, to a venue, or to and from their wireless carrier. You know, if you think about the way this works today, I may have parental controls you know, enabled on my kid's cell phone, but they walk into a venue where they attach to an open Wi-Fi access point, and all the work I did in setting up my parental controls is now gone because they're on a new network. They have a new IP address, and none of that stuff is sticky. So at ALU, we've worked to make all of that consistent authentication and then application of policy a reality today. And then, you know, lastly, there's also this idea of device management. So, you know, one of the problems that we're facing is, you know, this constant issue with authentication. You know, how do I get a user on the network? And everybody, you know, hates fumbling around with portals. That's not to say that, you know, captive portals aren't great, but, you know, if you connect to a Wi-Fi network somewhere and you have to mess around with the device and try to remember what your username and password is and go through multiple screens in order to connect, it's not great from a user experience perspective. So being able to bring those guys on the network transparently where they already have the configuration, they already have their authentication credentials, either because we're looking at their SIM, you know, the ICC ID on their SIM card, or because we're looking at a certificate that's been pre-installed on the device. All of those technologies are available. It's really just a matter of coming up with a consistent business model in order to make it very transparent and easy for the user to manage. So, summary, ALU, we don't do APs, but we do all of the back-end infrastructure in order to make this, you know, carrier-grade, transparent network a reality for your users. And we have a very healthy, you know, as I look across the room, I see a lot of familiar faces. We have a very healthy Wi-Fi business in global MSOs, so we're pretty proud of that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So as part of the poll of the panel, how many connected devices do your kids have?
So interesting. I'd probably say the average is probably around 5 or 6 connected devices when you look at phones, tablets, laptops. what are those little PSs, the little, yeah, little PSP things that they're carrying around. So I'd say 5 to 6 on average. Another interesting statistic, and this is relevant to what one of the other panel members said. So I have 3 kids, so that's 5 people in our house. I go through my 300 gigabyte data cap on Comcast around the 10th or 11th of the month, right? So, and I start getting those notices saying we're going to charge you for more bandwidth. So
Comcast must love you guys.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they love me.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next we'll hear from Ann Hatchell from Amdocs.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure some of you are wondering, Amdocs, Wi-Fi, what's the fit? Amdocs is probably best known for being, one of the leading software billing vendors in the telecom industry. We've been actually working in Wi-Fi for about 5 to 6 years now, primarily in areas around the core network, things like access, onboarding, intelligent offload, primarily on the mobile side, now becoming much more important, obviously, on the MSO side, as well as monetization. And kind of just echoing what Steve said earlier, I think we're at a very interesting inflection point when it comes to this notion of transition to carrier grade. And when you transition to carrier grade, there's a whole new focus, obviously, on quality of experience. And quality experience as a topic, you could say, wow, what is that? I mean, it covers many different aspects of it, from the onboarding experience, making sure it's seamless, what happens when you're actually on Wi-Fi, in terms of, if there's a need to get offloaded to a different access point, how does that experience get managed, coverage and capacity. And it starts to have implications as well on a lot of your back-end systems. And all of a sudden, when you're going to go carrier grade, you need systems like planning tools, design tools, traditional types of OSS types of systems, inventory tools to actually make sure that you can manage that end-to-end experience. I think one point I wanted to make around quality of experience is, we did a survey of about 5,000 cellular users, actually, earlier in the year, about their perspectives on quality of experience. So again, this wasn't polling the service providers, it was actually polling the consumers or business users. The thing that I found absolutely fascinating when it came to Wi-Fi was a good proportion of those surveyed globally were 4G users, LTE users. They were by far the largest group that looked for Wi-Fi, even more so than kind of 3G users or any of the other legacy technology users. And when we asked them why, about 60% of them said for better quality. So interestingly, that there's a perspective that you are going to get better quality when you move over to Wi-Fi, and this is coming from, a set of users using, current technology that, promises to provide, better speed and bandwidth and so forth. So again, back to that inflection point, we know how popular Wi-Fi is with users. It's not just about saving money on their kind of cellular bills and so forth. It's really starting to become more about quality. So as I mentioned, this is really the inflection point to start thinking about beyond just carrier grade in terms of ruggedized access points and standards-based systems and whatnot. You really got to start thinking about some of the tools and capabilities that you need to put in place to really manage that experience.
It's amazing that people are seeing Wi-Fi as higher quality. I think that would come as a surprise to a lot of people here, to a lot of service providers.
It was definitely a bit of one of the kind of key takeaways in that. It was actually very, very interesting. Now, there's no question, large proportion of them kind of wanted to go to Wi-Fi to save money because they can save money on their kind of regular, metered data in cellular. But there is a perspective of higher quality and from 4G users.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Next, we hear from Jeff Templeton from NetScout.
Hi, I'm Jeff Templeton with NetScout, Sales Engineering Director. Our focus as a company has been around service assurance. And we really look at that as there's 2 pieces to service assurance. There's proactive and predictive service assurance, and there's reactive piece. And much of our focus has been around the proactive and predictive so that we can understand when users are being affected. And as I think most people probably see is that most users on Wi-Fi networks do not call in and file complaints, right? It's, I'll find another way to get on the network. So it's very important to start monitoring to make these networks carrier grade and know what's going on in the network. So again, it kind of relates to what Ann mentioned, is that you have to be monitoring the network. for user experience. So again, our focus has been user experience, how do you reduce operation costs, how do you isolate the issue in the network? And we've really built out our suite of products with a recent acquisition of Tektronix, Arbor, some VSS products, as well as some Fluke products across the board. And we're deployed in many of the cable networks, specifically monitoring the complexity of Wi-Fi network, because again, there's many different steps from the captive portal to the authentication issues to roaming, right? And you need to be able to quickly be alerted and find out where that issue is so that you can solve it before users are, impacted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, JT. And last but not least, we'll hear from Scott Pettygrove from Viavi.
Good morning, everybody. And my name is Scott Pettygrove. I work in the Access Products Division, and we do...
Can't hear you, Scott.
Is that any better? Is this thing on?
Yeah.
I think they're working on it.
All right, very good. My name is Scott Pettygrove. I work in the Access Products Division for Viavi. We build Wi-Fi test equipment, so a lot of my comments will have that kind of bias to it as well. But Jeff, you gave me a good segue, I think, there. Today we're going to talk a lot about monetizing Wi-Fi, carrier-grade Wi-Fi. A lot of that has to do with the outdoor network, and justifiably so. But ignoring the indoor network and the residential side of that's probably an error. And possibly a costly one, too. So today, Rob mentioned earlier that a lot of Wi-Fi networks that are being installed in the home are best effort. Sometimes they're not just best effort, but they're even self-installed by the homeowner. And you take that and you start to overlay, over-the-top video services. And when Netflix doesn't work outside by the pool, maybe the customer's unhappy. Maybe they find another way to connect. Maybe they call the service provider. And many of you guys are probably already used to the increasing call volume that you get for just those types of problems in the best effort network. And if you raise the stakes of that and try to deploy a real service like wireless IPTV over that network, all of a sudden wireless IPTV is something that customers are paying for. They really care about that service. And if it doesn't work because we didn't necessarily anticipate that they wanted to move their wireless set-top box from the location you installed it to outside on the deck so they could watch football on Sunday, then you get a phone call, and that phone call has a little bit more energy behind it. And I'm thinking about Wi-Fi first and other carrier-grade Wi-Fi technologies and what that means in the home, with expectations that you'll be able to use your Wi-Fi handset to make real phone calls, real high-quality phone calls from anywhere in the home. If you haven't planned for that right now, that's liable to be a significant disruption. And the number of phone calls that you get as a result of overlaying that type of service onto that Wi-Fi network might be even larger than what you're experiencing today. So as any test equipment vendor might advocate, install it right the first time. So trying to understand today, as you install your Wi-Fi networks today, how can I prepare for these services in the future? Pretty important. So that includes making sure you understand where the best place for the access point is, making sure you understand which metrics as you're installing are those that are predictive, like you said earlier, so that you can tell where and how, what types of things might lead to problems in the future. Installing with margin to all the locations that the customer cares about, even if you can't get wall-to-wall coverage or wall-to-wall testing in the house, because that does take a while. At least understand where the customer wants to place their devices, wants to use their Wi-Fi service, and optimize for those points. And lastly, find a way to educate the customer. Educate the customer about Wi-Fi, because even though we use Wi-Fi every single day, most of us, there are very few people who really understand the ins and outs of Wi-Fi and why certain problems exist. So educating the customer about Wi-Fi, and specifically educating them about how their Wi-Fi network performs, does wonders for reducing that customer care burden and the numbers of the callback percentage. One of our customers said as much as 40% reduction if you can adequately educate the customer.